evidence-based research findings on what works for annual sustainability fundraising. I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz. This is the first day from the Fundraising School, and I am delighted to welcome back Dr. Ruth Hansen. She's an associate professor at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. She leads their nonprofit management and leadership study, research, and teaching. And she and a colleague came out with a paper entitled A Literature Review of Experimental Studies in Fundraising. Now, this is the strength of the Fundraising School. Wherever possible, our content is research evidence-based, not just a fundraiser telling their story, but we follow the evidence. And Ruth, you have given us so much evidence in this paper. Thanks for being back with us on the Fundraising Schools podcast.
Oh, thanks so much. It's always a pleasure, Bill. It really is. And I mean, like, well, I do have to say, even though Abhishek Bhatti, my co-author, and I did put a lot of work into this paper, it is building on the work of, let's see here, 187 other papers. And for anybody who has ever written a 20-page paper, that's what every single one of these was. So what we got to do was go through and analyze and make sense of and just take a look at what do these all mean together.
And one of those papers, I know people who've taken our classes at the Fundraising School or who follow the evidence-based research know the seminal work by Drs. Wiepking and Beckers on the 8 mechanisms of giving. That I know is one of the foundational papers that this one builds upon. And again, we want to emphasize to our audience here, even though the science is in this paper, there are many practical suggestions and recommendations based on the evidence for your annual sustainability fundraising. And so, Ruth, you looked at 187 studies and you looked for common themes. There are dozens of them in this paper. We don't have time to cover all of them. What are some that jumped out to you? You're like, oh, that's kind of cool. What were some of the things that jumped out for you as you did this work?
Yeah, it was really interesting. And first of all, I want to just give props, as you said, to Beckers and Wiepking, who gave us even this idea to do this. They had originally looked at 500 studies and came up with ways to categorize motivations or mechanisms for why people give. And some of the people watching might be familiar with that. For us, it was really interesting. We decided to focus specifically on experimental studies, and which I mean are certainly not the only forms of research. You can also do interviews. You can also do surveys, for example, or look at data sets. And we decided to specifically focus on fundraising because one of the things that we noticed is that a lot of people study giving. But when you look at, again, the evidence, the vast majority of giving comes about because of being asked. And very few papers have really focused on fundraising specifically. And as you know, and as I'm sure your viewers know, fundraisers are an important part of the process, right? So we want to see what evidence is there to guide them in the practice of fundraising.
And these studies, they looked at direct mail, they looked at special events. Remind me, did you look at digital outreach as well, like email and social media?
No, so these were studies that had all been published between 2007, which was where the Beckers and Wiepking paper cut off, and 2019. So, excuse me. So that's what, like 15, 16 years worth of studies. 2019, we did have obviously internet, and so that would have been included, but we didn't have like the burst of social media research that's happened more recently, or even the burst on like donor advised funds. So, yeah.
And again, to clarify, so it's not that the fundraising wasn't happening in those venues. It's just there wasn't as much research on the fundraising happening in those venues as it was so new in that particular time period. And so when Ruth emphasizes the importance of people being asked, this paper talks about how to ask and methods of asking. And Ruth, one of them that jumped out to me was that a donor is more interested in the percentage of people being helped than the number of people being helped, even when the number is higher. This just blew me away. So if you tell me I'm going to help 50% of the people and it's 5 out of 10, I'm more willing to give than if it's 40% of the people, even if it's 8 out of 20. 8 is more people, but 50 is the higher percentage. I mean, I just couldn't believe that when I saw it.
Isn't that something? Yeah. So it kind of comes down to obviously people are given so much information every day, especially like sometimes it feels like the news is just that fire hose of information, right? And so in our brains we rely on heuristics, we rely on shortcuts, and so it's very easy to grasp 50% is larger than 40%, easier apparently than it is to compare two numbers, right?
And just a way to present your ask then when you're doing your ask in a letter or in an email or at your special event. One of the other things your paper approaches is this whole idea of using negative images. And I think any of us who go to a fundraising or philanthropy conference, there are a lot of negative things said about using negative images, whether it's animals not doing well or children who are in poor health and these types of things. And you found kind of a nuanced finding, I think, about presenting negative images in our annual fundraising. What did you find?
Yeah, and this is something too where sometimes it's hard to bridge the world of academics who maybe don't have the background working in fundraising, fund development, with people who are practicing and maybe aren't as familiar with research. So we did find there are several studies that have found that if you show somebody who is clearly like in anguish, right? An upsetting image, that upsetting image will result in higher donations, but experiments are generally set up to be one shot. So even though as fundraisers, we know through practice, we know through training that you don't just get people in and then drop them, right? You want to develop relationships. You want to, as Tim Seiler has written, develop a constituency for your cause, right? So sometimes what happens on that first thing, you can get people to give, but there's definitely some evidence that suggests that the reason they're giving isn't as much out of empathy for the people they're seeing, or sometimes animals. They're seeing that it might be to make themselves feel better about viewing this disturbing thing. And in the future, if they know that that's there, they might do something like cross the road rather than engage more deeply and try and help. So this is something where we do challenge some of the science as being, okay, this is good for a one shot, but that's not the way fundraising practice typically works. What can we do for the longer term good of the cause and the people or animals who are being served?
So the negative image might attract the first gift, but more negative images, the donor might say, well, I guess I'm not making a difference. That situation is still where it's at. And as Ruth emphasized, we want to form a long-term relationship with our donors. And conversely, Ruth, one of the things I enjoyed about your paper was the confirmation of the importance of warm glow in that long-term relationship. Can you explain that for our audience, please?
Sure. So, worm glow is an idea that economists came up with a bit ago. Basically, they're saying this doesn't make economic sense. Why would people give away money? You are, by definition, not better off if you do that. You must be purchasing something that is valuable to you, that essentially feels good or aligns with your values or what have you. And that has value. And that is what economists have termed warm glow. And there's some there's some evidence that came out in looking at these papers that, donor motivation varies on the size of gift. And I'm sure most of your listeners are probably nodding their heads right now saying, yep, we know that. And what the research has found is that smaller donors, so really the beginning of that pipeline, so this is very important, right? We don't want to neglect that, are often really sensitive to warm glow. Once people are more engaged, once they are familiar with your organization, with your cause, then they might be moving on towards altruism, which would be more a sense of empathy, of wanting to help the other people who are benefiting from your cause.
And again, when we think about fundraising practice, a negative image might be if you don't donate, these 10 men will still be homeless. A warm glow would be if you donate, you can make a difference in their lives by giving them a safe place to stay tonight. The ultimate result is the same. It's how we're describing that, either in negative terms or in a positive warm glow term. Ruth, I also want to ask you about special events. Again, this is one of those, a little bit of myth busting going on in your paper wonderfully, that, we do know sometimes nonprofits rely too heavily on special events. And at the Fundraising School, as you know, we teach, special events can work. Let's just make sure we understand all the work that's involved and that the net return is correct. But what did you find out about people and their proclivity to donate when other people are physically present with them?
Isn't that interesting? Yeah, so much, and again, for many of your viewers, I'm sure this will really resonate, right? So much of the joy of helping an organization, sometimes that can be really emphasized and layered with the joy of being with other people, especially other people who also care about your organization. But there's also issues of reputation there, right? My very first fundraising job out of college was with Carnegie Hall. And if you want an example of an organization, before that, I had been a student worker at my university. And so going from this alumni centered, kind of nostalgia based, this is where you met your wife, this is or husband, this is where you met some of your best friends. Hey, come out to the football game, let's all sing the school song. Going from that to a situation where, certainly with our major donors, I was actually reading issues of Town and Country to see where else our major donors were giving and who they were, who their peers were, who they were talking with, right? And very much aware of reputation, aware of, okay, if we put my name here, is it going to be at the same size as somebody else's name someplace else? Or perhaps a little larger. So there's a reputational influence there too, right? If everybody else at your table is participating in the paddle race, you probably, there's a real pressure there not to be the one person who sits it out or the one person who comes in, with like a 2-figure gift instead of a 3 or 4-figure gift. So yeah, those are some of the findings.
There is that positive peer pressure that can happen at a special event. And Ruth, some of our audience might be saying, can that carry over to direct mail? If I mention that others have donated, should I put that in the letter, in the email message? And this paper says yes.
Yeah, it's really interesting, especially, and this is real argument for knowing your audience, who you are writing to. Now obviously there are going to be some situations, if you're doing acquisition mail, where you know the least about your audience as you will ever know, but to the extent that you can segment your audience and then bring in things that are relevant to the people who are reading it. Certainly, like Jen Shang has done some work looking at, does it make a difference if we match the genders and say, somebody else with a gender that matches the readers or the listeners just gave about this amount. That makes it real easy for people to lock in. If you're at a university, it could be another alumna. It could be somebody else from your class, just highlighting some kind of identity, people who enjoy the Nutcracker, just like you, right?
It's a way to help encourage people. They want to see folks who they identify with. And if those folks are donating, I can donate as well. And, again, Ruth, there are just dozens and dozens of these practical examples throughout the paper. And one of the things I enjoyed most about it is so many of these research-based practices can be summed up as the donor wants to make a difference, regardless of their income, regardless of their geography, regardless of the cause. Again, can you please emphasize that point? Because that seemed to me to be a thread running through so many of these. Let the donor know how their gift, regardless of the size of the gift, can make a difference.
I think that's so true. And part of this, so before I went back to Indiana to do my doctoral work, I had been a fundraiser for about 20 years. And sometimes I really strongly feel that part of the work that we have to do as fundraisers is not just speaking with donors, but also speaking with those in our administration, speaking with those on our board of trustees, speaking with those in the finance office, and kind of advocating that these are not just people with checkbooks or credit cards. These are people with things that they care about, and our job is to facilitate that. I think one of the things that really one of the interesting papers that we read that showed this was, even if you're talking about, say, an auction where you have somebody who is trying to, they're maybe on the lookout for, I don't know, that perfect desk for their guest room or whatever, just to pick something completely unrelated to my own life. And if they see something and it's available, they're probably going to buy it. But if they see that it's benefiting a charity that they care about, they're probably actually going to bid more for that item than they would. So even if there's like mixed motivations of, yes, this is something I want, and this is something I want, you get that double good.
And what they also want is fulfillment of their philanthropic values and motivations, and knowing that those are being met through an impact on the cause they care about through the donation, regardless of the amount, at the base of your pyramid, the top of the pyramid, wherever the case might be. So now Ruth has read 187 papers so that we don't have to. In her paper that came out that she co-authored, a literature review of experimental studies in fundraising. And it's an easy read, folks. This has been put into good practical suggestions for all of us. Ruth, what a delight to have you back with us. Thank you. Keep turning out that research that gets translated into effective fundraising practice. We appreciate you so much.
Oh, thank you. And thank you so much for all the work you do too. This is really good stuff, and it is a benefit to fundraisers everywhere. So thank you.
And research supports our curriculum wherever possible at the Fundraising School. More than 24 courses now, leading to 5 different certificates in person and online. We also can customize training just for your nonprofit or your region, or maybe it's your association, whatever that looks like in the United States or around the world. We have quarterly webinars and these weekly podcasts, and our evidence is gathered in our textbook, Achieving Excellence in Fundraising, the book now out in its 5th edition. You can find all these resources online at go.iu.edu/TFRS for the Fundraising School. So grateful for our producers today, Mike Anthony and Jennifer Boffman. I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz. Now you are now more fully informed on this first day from the Fundraising School.